Thank you all again so much for spending your Thursday morning with us. It's a beautiful sunny day in Summit County, soon to turn snowy, which I'm excited about. I mean, it's only March. So with that, we're going to just jump right in here. So we'll be ready for the first slide. Awesome. Thanks so much, Lisa. So my name is Rachel, and before we do introductions, I'm going to go ahead and talk us a little bit through housekeeping. So if you haven't noticed yet, all the participants are automatically muted, but what you can do is you can use that chat function at the bottom of your screen to communicate with us. So that being said, that's more if you're having technical questions. We're going to have some pauses throughout this session where you guys can ask questions, and we want you to ask questions. So please use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. That's really how you're going to submit those questions, and then folks can see the benefit of having those answered as we go through the session. So that's the gist, and I think we're going to jump into the agenda with some introductions first. So my name is, like I said, Rachel Zarin. I work for the High Country Conservation Center. So we are an environmental nonprofit based in Summit County. So that's Breckenridge, Frisco, Dillon, Silverthorne, the Summit County area. And in addition to working on water conservation, we also work on climate action. So what does that mean? We work with local governments to help pass policy, as well as we run on-the-ground programs to help people get behind the wheel of an electric vehicle, get rooftop solar installed, or perhaps even test out induction cooktops is kind of the latest thing that we're talking about here. So lots of fun. And then I work closely on those water programs with my coworker, Lisa Evans, who I'm going to hand it off to for an introduction.
Everyone, I'm Lisa. I work closely with Rachel, and I am the Office and Program Coordinator at High Country Conservation Center. So I work closely on water programs, and I'm really excited to have you all here today. And Bob and Doug, I'll hand it to you.
You or me, Doug?
Hi, I'm Doug Smith with Irrigation Analysis, and we're looking forward to having a nice and informative webinar this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, good morning, Bob Howie, also Irrigation Analysis. I'm pretty dangerous, I say, in the irrigation realm, but my background is landscape, horticulture. I'm a certified arborist and consulting arborist, and I also worked a lot with turf. So looking forward to my portion of the talk today.
Thanks, guys. So Lisa's going to talk a little bit, give you some background here with our agenda. So that's where our water comes from. Obviously, like the watersheds look a little bit different depending on where you are in the state. Recognize we've got some folks all over the state here today, which is super exciting. And so Lisa's going to get into that. We're going to hand it off to Bob to talk efficient irrigation, and then send it on over to Doug. I believe that's the order. We're going to let them be dangerous because we love it, and they're the experts here. So please get those questions into the Q&A as we roll along, and then I'll wrap us up. So think of those questions, look in the chat for resources, and away we go. With that, I'm going to hand it to Lisa.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. I'm really excited to kind of engage different stakeholders about where our water comes from, the importance of water, and kind of the concept of why we need to use less. I'm sure all of you on the call have been seeing all the headlines about water in the West, the concerns that we've been having. But I know that a lot of our customers and the people that we interact with might not have those same insights or might not be reading those same headlines. And there's a lot of people moving to Colorado, really popular place to be. But all the same shared values, might not be across the board. And so we might have customers from Florida who might be asking, hey, like, I don't really have to conserve water where I'm from, or we have a really big blue planet. Isn't there enough water to go around? And so I kind of want to remind us of the bigger picture of water as we get started. So yes, we have a lot of water on this planet. 70% of the earth is water, but 97% of the earth's water is salt water. And so if we do the math right, that's going to leave 3% for fresh water, but we can't use all of that fresh water. So I want to introduce you to this concept called drop in the bucket, which I really enjoy doing with some of the middle school classes that I work with here in Summit County. So this concept called drop in the bucket, if we think about all the water in the world, it kind of is a little overwhelming. So if you can think about all the water in the world fitting into a bucket, 97% of that bucket is going to be salt water and 3% of that bucket is going to be fresh water. And then we can't use all of that fresh water because some of it is in icebergs or glaciers. So we only have 0.3% of that water that is non-frozen fresh water. So rivers, lakes, groundwater. But some of that water can be contaminated, polluted. We might not be able to access all of the groundwater. And so we only have 0.003% of the water on the planet that is available for human use. And if that is in the context of the bucket, that is one drop in that bucket that is available for human use. So I like to kind of remind us of that concept to think about how precious water really is. So bigger picture down to kind of the more local level. I know a lot of folks on here are living within the Colorado River Basin, but I like to kind of remind us of the connection that the Colorado has for all of us. So I'm sitting here in Summit County in the Blue River watershed. That's going to be draining into the Colorado River in Kremling. Some of us might be in the Eagle River watershed or the Roaring Fork. If you're in Denver, you're definitely going to be benefiting from the Colorado River, even though you are not directly in the Colorado River Basin. But the Colorado River is very vast and 7 states use that water. So there are 40 million people that use the Colorado River. And it's not all just folks who are within this basin. We have obviously Denver, who uses a lot of the Blue River watershed for its drinking water, as well as places like Salt Lake City. We have Albuquerque, New Mexico, Los Angeles, a huge city, San Diego. The Colorado River makes its way all the way to California and provides water for the Imperial Valley in California, which is a big agriculture location. And we actually get a lot of our produce in the winters from the Imperial Valley. So a lot of the Colorado River is used for municipal use, recreation, agriculture, and it is a very, very big basin. So like I mentioned, we all know there's been a lot of water headlines about water challenges within the Colorado River Basin. What are some of those challenges? I'll go over a couple of those. They're all very complicated, but this is kind of just a major overview to kind of remind us and to kind of think about this as we look at, why do we need to use less? So climate change is one of those big challenges. We're seeing increasing temperatures throughout the basin. It is predicted that by 2050, we're going to be seeing average temperatures rise between 2 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is going to cause some issues as far as how this basin is going to be using water, because increased temperatures means decreased stream flow. We're going to be seeing our soils be really parched and dry, and we've already seen that. I mean, we've had 2 decades of drought in Colorado and the western states. So increasing temperatures could definitely see detrimental effects. Increasing temperatures also impacts wildlife. We're seeing fishing restrictions. We're also seeing increased risk for wildfire. So climate change and this increased temperature, warming temperatures, something that we're seeing and are we going to continue to deal with into the future. And on top of that, we've already seen 22% of our river being decreased within the past 2 decades. So it's definitely going to be something we're thinking about as increased temperatures continue. The US Geological Survey did a study that showed that for every 2 degrees Fahrenheit rise in average temperature across the basin, stream flow is reduced by 9%. And I don't know if that really makes sense in context, but how I like to think about it is there are 40 million people that rely on the Colorado River for water. And if we're going to be seeing a maybe 10% decrease in the stream flow, which 4 million people are going to be losing out on water. And that doesn't even consider wildlife, growing population. So these are just kind of things to consider as we look at the challenges that we're going to be facing into the future. So essentially, we have a math problem, and this isn't something that is new, but I think it's interesting to point out that we are kind of operating on water allocation that was created 100 years ago. The Colorado River Compact allocated water for the upper basin and the lower basin to use. And this was kind of a flawed compact to begin with, because it was basing these water flows and these allocations of water on flows that actually didn't exist even at the time. So people were kind of promised water and are still promised water that doesn't really flow as much in the Colorado River today. And it's definitely shrinking, and it's something that we're all going to be looking at as far as cuts. And I think it's really important that all of us are on the call today, because, no matter what industry you're in, we all are influencing different customers. We're all talking to people about water. And I think, all of us collectively taking action is definitely going to be a drop in the bucket. But as we continue to create or just keep acting on, how can we use less water? It's going to be something we're going to have to do, and we're going to be forced to do in the future. But, how can we be proactive about this now? So with that, if there's any questions, we can definitely take them. I know that was like super quick overview, but I know the meat of this is going to be Bob and Doug talking to us about how we can take action. So I just wanted to give us an overview of why why we're doing this. So I'll hand it to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so Lisa just gave us a really great overview. And if we go on to that next slide, we'll kind of think about how does this relate to me when we go back to those like 4 million people, right? If those river flows keep shrinking, and which 4 million people are going to lose out. Beyond that, when we're losing water through inefficient irrigation in our own yards and in the places and spaces where we work, it's a level we need to be more responsible. And this is a stat from the EPA. 50% of the water that we use outdoors is lost due to inefficient irrigation. So I'm thrilled to have the folks at Irrigation Analysis here to talk to you about how to make it more efficient. And they're also going to talk to you about designing for our climate, because those are things we can do here. Another thing to keep in mind, whether it's with your customers, with your stakeholders, the cost of water is rising. The town of Breckenridge just did a rate study, and they're adding a tier to their water rates. And I know Copper Mountain Metro District is looking at their rates as well. So one of the things that I did neglect to do before I handed off to Irrigation Analysis is that we told you who we were, but we didn't find out who you guys are. So I'm hoping, I just launched a poll. We're going to give you about, 30 or 45 seconds to answer that. Because we're interested to hear who we got on the call. And I think that that's going to help us maybe tailor the main part of this presentation to where we're at. Awesome. We still got some responses coming in, so I'm going to leave that up there for a second. And then for the folks who've already responded, remember, type those questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, because that's how we're going to answer those pieces. So thank you guys so much for being engaged. We're thrilled to see that. Can you guys see the results on the screen? I don't know if Doug or Bob or Lisa want to give me a thumbs up. So it looks like we got a good, okay, no results on the screen. I'm sorry, I'm relearning how to use Zoom here. Share results, look at that. So it looks like we got a good mix of people. I think we finally got those results up. That's great to see. And I think this session is going to be applicable for all of us. So we have an understanding of who's on the call. And then the next thing that I wanted to do is talk to you, is understand some of your barriers to water efficient landscapes. And what this information is going to do, if you guys could spend a few seconds answering some of those questions, this is going to help us understand what are the, oh, I'm seeing that maybe those questions aren't necessarily showing up all the way. It might be kind of hard. So if, for the folks who can read it, would love to get your input on, oh, if you hover over each of the answers, that should allow you to see the, full answers. And what this information does is when we can understand your barriers to water efficiency, it allows us as HC3 to offer more relevant programs in the community and also understand what future trainings should look like. So we'll give a couple more seconds. Looks like answers are still coming in. All right, I'm going to go ahead and, oh, we still got answers coming in, so I'm going to keep that one live. So I do thank you for your patience on that. I'm glad you guys are able to read it. I'll go ahead and end the poll and share the results now that I remember how to do it. So I don't know that there's a ton of surprising results here for us. I think this is all great information that some folks just simply aren't concerned about the cost to irrigate, and we can talk about that and address that in the Q&A. Well, again, really appreciate your engagement and excited to hand it off to the folks at Irrigation Analysis to take us into the reasons why you're here today.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. This is Doug Smith with Irrigation Analysis. We are going to switch it up. I will be doing the efficient irrigation module, so I hope that's okay. But I just want to talk about irrigation, and when we say efficient irrigation, really what does that mean? And so there's a lot of different terminologies that we have that are kind of interchanged. And so, but when we talk about the efficient irrigation, really what we're saying is efficiency is how much water is being used compared to how much water should be used to effectively irrigate a landscape. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And so we just need to ensure that the amount of water we're applying is the amount of water that that landscape needs. And so that's kind of the metric that we're trying to go after. Next slide, please, Lisa. So there's 4 factors that are really needed for an efficient system. So the first one is a quality design. Like you build a house, you have to have a blueprint for it. And the same is true with an irrigation system. So really what you want to do is make sure that you have an irrigation system that is properly designed, both hydraulically and for the best coverage, and that can work within water windows. And so there's a lot of different factors to consider. And most designers these days really do go after the efficiency level, because we all know that water is a concern. Next slide, please. The second one is installation. So you can have a perfect design, and if the installation doesn't go in correctly, then you can easily diminish the quality of the landscape design. And also, there's going to be field changes. So you have a 2D world in the irrigation design and 3D world when the contractor's trying to install it. So inevitably, there are going to be changes and factors that aren't going to allow you to put it in exactly as designed. So that's just where communication comes in between the contractor and the designer of how do we best make these changes to maintain the efficiency or the uniformity is what we're going to talk about of the irrigation system. Next slide, please. The third is maintenance, timely maintenance. So we see a lot of problems when we do our irrigation audits in the field, and sometimes we go back even months later and the issue still hasn't been resolved. But a small leak like this can actually lose a lot of water, and not only that, but you can damage equipment. So the thing is with the maintenance is that we have to have walkthroughs periodically, routinely also, or we have to implement smart systems that will tell us that, hey, we've got a problem on this zone, so that we can react to it faster. So maintenance is a big issue. And then finally, active water management. So with the water management, we have to know what we're irrigating. So if we don't have a metric to measure how much water is actually being used, then we don't know if we're being efficient with that water or not. So today there are a lot of tools available, such as flow sensors and master valves and things like that, and then also the computer. So everything is computerized. There are a lot of web-based programs and softwares that allow you to access controllers, access live data from flow sensors, and so you can actively manage that to make sure that we are using, again, the proper amount of water. One other note real quick, going back to the number 2 item, is the quality installation. And I would just kind of say beware of this one, because you can get some contractors, I'm not including everybody, of course, but that want to, quote, value engineer. And so really what that means is that they're trying to reduce the overall cost for the owner or developer in a lot of cases, which is commendable. But really what we need to be focusing on is how are we going to use that value engineering to keep an efficient irrigation system. So usually the first things that go are those flow sensors and master valves and the smart controllers and all those tools that you need to manage that water. So kind of just be aware of that, and sometimes that does go on. Next slide, please. Okay, so hydrozones. We're going to talk about a hydrozone, and this is where we really start dialing down into what makes an irrigation system efficient and how we use our water. So you can see in this little diagram that we have 4 different hydrozones, and they all have a different PF. So the PF stands for plant factor. And so that is a factor based on, if you look at hydrozone 4, there's a plant factor of 1. And that is a high water use area. So that's most likely going to be some sort of a bluegrass turf that uses the most water. And then everything else is kind of a factor off of that. So you can see hydrozone 1 has got a plant factor of 0.1, and it's in a low water use area. But the hydrozone 3 is also a low water use area, but it's got a plant factor of 2. So that's kind of dependent on the landscape architect or designers to put together plant palettes that have similar water use requirements, so that, you know, when they're putting their design together, they'll have this section as a hydrozone that will have a different water use requirement. And then there's hydrozone 2 that may be just like a shrub bed, and it's got a plant factor of 0.4. So they all have little different watering requirements. Next slide. So why is that important? That's important because they have different watering requirements, we can't put them all on one irrigation zone. Because if we did, say we had zone 3 and 4 on the same zone, well, we have to water one of those for that plant factor. So we're obviously going to pick that high water use. So if they were on the same zone, what that means is that the shrub bed on that zone is going to be heavily overwatered. So we want to separate those into zones. Next slide, please. And how do we manage that? Well, it's kind of explaining that. We would have a separate zone for each one of those hydrozones. And that way we can control the programming, how long they run, how often they run, and then apply just the water that's needed for those hydrozones. Next slide. All right, so the efficiency process really does start with the irrigation design. So when we're doing an irrigation design, we really need to first of all, we need to put everything into the proper hydrozones. So go ahead and hit the next slide. So define the hydrozone. So you have a hydrozone, and we know that it's going to be a separate zone. So you just kind of outline that area and make sure that it's going to have its own zone. Now, a lot of times it's like, well, I've got 8 zones on a small area. That seems crazy. And it seems crazy, but it's really the proper way to do it just based on the plant material. Proper layout of the components for the highest uniformity. So when we start talking about uniformity, that's kind of the name of the game. That's one of the big factors in efficiency, is how uniform is our sprinklers. So turf grass is a little more, you need a higher uniformity for turf grass than you do like on a shrub bed like you see here, only because of the way the root structure is. So if we're looking at the photograph here in this image, you can see that this may have been turf once. And so now they've put in some a wildflower mix and maybe a native seed mix and some shrubs or something like that. And you can still see that there are some spray heads there, and they're not high pops, but they are spraying into it, which is fine because we don't need to have that uniformity as high in this bed. However, when we have a spray head, it's going to be some evaporation from the nozzle, and so there could be overspray from that nozzle also. And so it's not necessarily the most efficient method to apply water to the root zone for this type of area. It could be, and maybe we need to put those on high pops so that there's no spray disruption of that nozzle. So there's a few different things we could look at, and how can we really effectively get the water to the root zone for those plants. And then the use of high efficiency products for optimum performance. So again, a drip line through there, you could snake some drip lines, some inline dripper tubing, and the water is going directly to the soil. So you're eliminating, like I said, the evaporation a little bit. And so that would be considered high efficiency compared to a spray head. And then use certified irrigation designers. So the certified irrigation designers, it's a voluntary program. And so they're dedicated to doing the right thing and creating efficient designs and so forth. So, they're going to be the first ones to help you, and they understand how the system goes together and what products to use. Okay, so you probably all have heard of head-to-head spacing and why it's so, and we want to talk about why it's so important. So, and this could go back to that value engineering note that I mentioned. So when a manufacturer makes a sprinkler head, they focus on the nozzle. And the nozzle is the emission device where the water comes through. So what they do is they test them. And sorry for the fuzziness of the images here, but in the corporate espionage of the sprinkler world, the photographs are very well kept. So anyway, but you can see that it's in a warehouse. And so they do some testing in warehouses, in the factories. And so like on the lower left side of that first photograph is probably a sprinkler head, and it would spray, can you go back, is a sprinkler head, and it'll spray a stream, and then it's going to catch water in those cups. And it's connected to computers, and it measures how much water falls in each one of those cups. And so then that's in the warehouse, and then you can do a similar test like that in the field, as you see below, where there's just a single row of cups that's collecting water. So when we do that test, it gives us what we call the sprinkler profile leg. Now you can hit the next slide, Lisa. So when we measure that water in those cups, we get a profile like you see in the graph on the bottom. So the sprinkler head would be on the left side of that graph. And as we go out away from the sprinkler head, that's the right side of that graph. So we measure how much water falls in each cup. And ideally, and if we could have that as a perfectly straight line, then everything's great. However, because of their gravity and other environmental factors, as soon as that water leaves the nozzle, the water droplets fall to the earth, to the turf. And so the farther away you get from that sprinkler head, the less water you're going to have in that area. So what we need to do is we need to put a sprinkler head at the other end on the right side of that graph where it touches the ground, spraying back towards the other head. So that's where your head-to-head comes in. And what that's going to do is it's going to kind of fill in the low spot on the right side and give you as much of a flat line as we can get. Now, the key here is that every nozzle and every sprinkler head performs differently at different pressures and spacings. So depending on how, if you start to stretch that head and pull them apart, you're going to have a dry spot in the middle. Or conversely, if they're too close together, and we see that a lot where we have a small area and there's just very large rotor heads in that area, and there's a lot of overspray, and then all of a sudden you're putting a lot of water in one area, and then you just have a lot of waste in other areas. All right, so then that's the sprinkler profile. So then that only gives us one section of that nozzle. So what we're trying to do is find out what the uniformity of that whole zone is. Next slide, please. So what we do is we take it out into the field, and then we set up grids. And so the grid in the pattern of the sprinkler zone is collecting water. And then we collect the data for those in each can, and then we can determine how uniform that zone is. And the more cups that you have, the more accurate it's going to be. And in the Quell curriculum and the Irrigation Associate curriculum, you want at least 24 cups per zone. So you have to put a lot of cups out. And in large rotor zones, I mean, you could have a lot of cups, but 24 is at least the minimum. And then you can create a graph. Next slide, please. That looks like these. So these are called densograms. And this is what you can put all the data that we collected into a chart. There's another way to do it as well, where we come up with a number, a decimal, that tells you basically what the uniformity is. But this gives you kind of a graphic. So in the top chart, you can see where there's the little black dots, which represent the sprinkler heads. Then there's kind of a white area around it and then some blue spots. Well, this is not a very uniform system here. And just from experience, when we're looking at something like that, we can tell that the pressure probably wasn't at the right pressure for these nozzles to operate. So in the field, in the real world, if you go out to a site and you see a bunch, we call them donuts. So there's dry areas, dead areas are right around the head, and then there's some green areas outside of that. Those are donuts, and that generally tells you that there's low pressure on the site, so a little troubleshooting there. But anyway, we want it to be as consistent as possible. So if you look at the densogram on the bottom, you can see that it's a lot better, but there's still some dark blue spots and some light blue areas. And so what that means is that when we irrigate, we're going to have to irrigate to put enough water down for those light blue areas to provide enough water to the plant material to sustain and look good. But conversely, that means that those dark blue areas are going to be overwatered. So we're looking for that perfect uniformity. There's really no such thing as perfect uniformity. The typical numbers would be like a 0.8 or 0.82 in that area would be considered very good. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so some other practices to think about. There's a few things. So when we're talking about repairs and maintenance, replace the broken parts with the same brand and type. It's pretty important. And I know it's not always convenient. You know, if you're a contractor and you go to a job site, hey, I've got a broken sprinkler, and they show up and they have brand A, and if you have brand B that's out there, it's like, well, I'll just put this in for now and get you fixed up, and then I'll come back later and put that right piece in. And generally that doesn't happen. So what that does is that will impact your uniformity, because the different manufacturers have different products and they perform differently. The other thing would be to conduct a regular wet check inspection. So what that means, wet check, is that you physically go out and you turn on each zone and you visually inspect it so you can see if there's any broken heads or if you have any overspray. And so then you can make those repairs on the spot or make notes for somebody else on your team maybe to do that work. And then reduce and eliminate overspray or obstruction. So especially on rotor heads, they're not perfect. You know, they work very well, but a lot of times they lose their arc. And so when they lose their arc, all of a sudden this sprinkler may be spraying in the street and it's not doing any good out there. So you just want to make sure that the arcs are adjusted. There's no overspray. Also, weather-based controllers are a big thing. It's not in this list, but it's a really important piece of the puzzle. And we saw kind of on the reporting and the management of it, what those can do. So they are, there's two things. So first of all, they're weather-based, which means that they're gathering weather data and then adjusting the sprinkler system based on that weather data. So if a person were going to try to do that, you know, he's going to have to go to the same controller 3 or 4 times a week. Well, the smart controller, weather-based controller, can do that daily based on the information that it collects. So it's adjusting the sprinkler and schedule, the runtime and schedule, so that you're getting just the optimum amount of water. They work really well together with the flow sensors that I mentioned. So if you have your controller learn flows on your zones, then if anything, like even if a nozzle were to pop off, it says, hey, this is outside the tolerance of my flow, and it can send an alert either by email or text, depending on the controller, and it will notify you, and you can tell your your maintenance company that, hey, I've got a leak on zone 3 at the Smith residence or wherever it is. And so that they can react to that and get that fixed in a timely manner. So that takes me into the next one. Don't ignore the notifications from the controllers. So the controllers are telling you, and this happens a lot when an older system is kind of converted to a newer control system, and we put in a flow sensor and master valve. And then what happens is the alerts are going off the chart because we have so many things going on out there. Well, the controller is doing its job. So until we can get that irrigation system kind of dialed into where it's supposed to be, then those alerts will back off a little bit. But what I've seen, unfortunately, is that some contractors get inundated with all these alerts and they've got too many things to do, they turn them off. And so then they don't know what's happening. And anyway, so someone has to manage and monitor all those alerts to make sure that the system's being managed and maintained properly. Use of drip irrigation instead of overhead, we talked about that just a little bit. But there's a lot of shrub beds that are spray irrigated. And again, the right product for the right application. And in some instances that might work. There are micro sprays that have a kind of a fine spray, and you can kind of pinpoint where that water goes. But with the drip irrigation, again, you're not putting any water into the atmosphere, into the air. So you're kind of eliminating the evaporation through that. And then the last thing I want to talk about real quick are rain sensors. And rain sensors are kind of a love-hate in the industry because there's a lot of people that insist they don't work, and there's people that insist they do. And the thing is that we just have to understand how they work and what they do. And in Colorado, in our semi-arid environment, the thing with rain sensors is that they work, but they just dry out fast. And so when they dry out fast, we just have to come up with some sort of a way to manage that. So we know we get some rain. Is it usable rain? Yeah, how are we going to use that? And so with rain sensors, again, depending on the smart controller, the weather-based controller, you can have an alert that says, okay, this controller initiated a rain delay. And so you can use that, and then you don't have to irrigate that night, and that's water saving. So I believe that they're a good tool. It's just that we have to know how they work in our climate and then how they can be managed. And then we open it up to questions and answers.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Doug. I think with so many different people on the line, I just think it's been so helpful to hear kind of that whole background, right? Because the efficient irrigation and low water landscapes, it all starts with design of an efficient system, right? And like you said, maintaining that system. And I think it was just so interesting to hear you say that folks are turning off alerts. I get it, right? We're all busy, but that's such a great example of where, each of us, no matter our jobs, has a role where we can influence efficiency and water conservation. So that really stuck out for me, but I think I would love to dive into some of these questions. And one of the ones that I'm going to kick us off with is, are water sensors or valves available for wells? And I would open it up to any of the panelists, and I'm also happy to chime in as well. So it looks like Lisa has an answer to that one.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just answering it live. I did not have that specific answer, but as far as I know, with wells, they do not.
Yeah, you could just use a flow sensor like you would in a potable system connected to the city water. And then that's just going to tell you what's downstream of the well. So depending on the well controls and the pump controls, there's a lot of different things that can tell you as well if you're having pump issues or water issues in your well. So there are some devices available, yes.
Great, thanks guys. And the only thing that I would add to that too is just the fact that the folks in Summit County who are on well water are not using that for irrigation. They would need to buy an entirely separate augmentation plan in order to have the rights to irrigate. So that kind of opens a whole other can of worms that we're not necessarily in a position to answer today. But certainly if you guys have questions about that and augmentation plans, we would be happy to find a good resource for you. And you can email us at info@highcountryconservation.org. And then I guess as we talk about Summit County and irrigation policies laws, this is a question that came through. I can go ahead and answer this one live. It's called, the question was, does Summit County have any irrigation policies and laws? And I of course, me being me, I'm not going to start off actually answering that question. I'm going to start off by saying that there's 5 government jurisdictions in Summit County. And I mean, this doesn't include Blue River, right? You have the towns of Breckenridge, you have the town of Frisco, Dillon, Silverthorne, as well as Summit County government. Keystone just voted, that's a process, right? But to become their own town. So each of these jurisdictions has their own policies and ordinances. And I'm gonna tell you, they are all different. So that's one of the places where HC3 works. Like I said, we work with local jurisdictions. As an example, when we think about like irrigation schedules, right? Breckenridge has year-round mandatory. Frisco has voluntary. There's a couple of smaller water districts. Oh, I didn't give you that answer, right? There's, in addition to those government jurisdictions that pass the policy, there's actually 19 special districts who are providing water to the people who live in those 5 jurisdictions. So each of those special districts may or may not have different watering schedules. So when we think about HC3's work, that's one of the projects that we're working on right now, is talking to all those government jurisdictions to see where can we unify, how can we unify, whether that's plantless or whatever else. So we answered that one. This is a great question from Stuart. And I'll probably throw this one out to Doug, or Bob, please jump in if you have stuff to add. And the question is, can you back engineer? So Steve says our HOA irrigation is 20 years old. I have a feeling you're not alone, Steve.
Yeah.
Is it cheaper to change to Xeriscape from Bluegrass, or what are your thoughts on this?
Right. So we do a couple of different things. When we do our evaluations, we come up with what we call a practical water audit. So we know that it's not always feasible just to go out and replace your entire irrigation system. And then also the water use is a concern. So kind of the back engineering from the irrigation system portion of it, we can maybe change some head locations, upgrade some of the equipment, and then get you into a more uniform and efficient system. But also we look for the non-essential turf areas, and Bob can speak a little bit about this. And yeah, are there areas that we can convert from that high water use thirsty bluegrass to a more native friendly, less water using grass? So that's also something that can be done for sure. As far as the cost of it goes, Bob, can you chime in on that?
Yeah. I kind of wanted to go back, something that you said there too, Doug, is, I mean, well, first of all, I'll let you guys know, we're the water doctors, water experts, efficiency experts, and that's in irrigation experts, and as well as, turf and landscape conversion. That's kind of, we consult and help people with that. So we like the position because we have the knowledge and expertise. We worked in the industry a long time, but also we're not trying to sell something. We're trying to just help you save water and help you all, whether you're the contractor or the municipality, or the end user, the customer, to save water and be more efficient with your water use. So just wanted to kind of make sure people understood that. So we're not trying to recommend things and then, create work for ourselves in that way. But so yeah, retrofitting, doing efficiency repairs and upgrades, as Doug said, that's kind of a relatively low-hanging fruit, relatively inexpensive way to use less water and be more efficient. And so it starts with the irrigation audit, system evaluation audit. Also looking at your water use is really, we didn't really talk about that, but that's early in the process, is how much water are you using now and how much should you be using given the landscaping you have and the location that it's in. That's really important to start with that, because sometimes it's surprising that it's not really that far off. You'd think it might be, it's just because the water bills are making you crazy, but it's really, it's maybe not as bad as you think, but more often than not, we find a lot of opportunities to increase efficiency, and it's not all that costly. So kind of jumping over to the other part of that question though, like landscape conversion, or taking bluegrass out and converting it over into more of a lower water use landscape. It very much depends on how much, how much you're going to do, the kind of the quantity of it really. Because if you have a big area, it's can kind of add up. It also, a larger area is gonna be pretty, will be more costly, of course, than a smaller area. But the turf to the least expensive thing to do is to kind of convert your existing turf to more of a natural grass, a native grass. Still can be very green, still can be, attractive and enjoyable, and you can have some color and wildflowers and things like that potentially out there, shrubbery even. So that's the least expensive. When you start kind of doing things like hardscapes, when you start doing beds, mulched beds, and dry stream beds and permeable, patios and things like that. Obviously it gets more expensive, but definitely is going to reduce the water use. So from a pure cost standpoint, converting a lawn to a native type grass situation is definitely most cost effective and will show kind of the biggest ROI, fastest ROI, and best improvement in your water use. So hopefully that answered the question.
That's great. I think that's super relevant. I know we have a lot of HOA representatives on the line now, and it's a question we get asked frequently at HC3. So if folks are looking to, whether it's transition their landscape or transition a portion of their HOA landscape, what should they do first? Is it, what's your first piece of advice to those people just starting to say, like, all right, my system's 20 years old. What do you tell them?
Doug, you or me?
You can go.
Okay. Well, I would, it's a great question. First is again, kind of a water use analysis, which is a very simple, thing to do. Figure out how much water they have been using, and you need to make sure that's accurate, both in terms of the gallons and the cost. It's also interesting to see if they're into higher rate tiers, because that is where a lot of the expense can come, and especially if you can make that more efficient. But do a water use analysis based on the landscaping that's there, and then really figure out how much water you're using and how much you should be using, what the opportunity for savings is, and reducing that with the existing landscape. So you might get done with that and go, well, it says we're going to use this high amount of water still. And so then you need to move over to, two things. One is, can we get some of that savings by just making what we have, this irrigation system, more efficient? Or two, do we need to look at taking out areas of, say, the term is non-essential turf grass, the areas, the grass areas that it's like, do we need that much grass? Does anybody even ever see that or use it or enjoy it? Or is it just peripheral, especially the, kind of peripheral lawn areas that, nobody even, maybe they look out their window in the morning when they get up, and otherwise they never see it, or they don't even see it at all. So those are the areas to really look at making conversions on. And we'll get into this. You're stealing my thunder. I'm stealing my own thunder. So is small little cut up pieces of grass are really inefficient to irrigate. So those are areas to look at and say, let's get this area out of grass. We won't have to mow it and trim it, fertilize it, all the things you have to do, but we also won't have to irrigate it when have water just, flowing down more water in a lot of those situations is going down the street, down the drain, than it is going to the grass we're trying to water. So.
Great, thank you. And I promise we're not going to steal your thunder. We have lots more questions coming through. So this is great. I think this conversation is in some ways inspiring more questions. So one of the questions here that we have from Sean, due to the ongoing drought, we are often asked by clients to keep native areas irrigated to reduce fire risk. Any ideas for dealing with these requests from clients?
You or me, Doug?
Well, it's kind of a catch-22 with that. If you're irrigating it, it's going to grow. And if you have a wildfire that comes through, it's going to burn. And even if you're irrigating it, really you're kind of feeding the fuel to some degree too. So There's the water use, the conservation aspect of it, and does it really work if you have the tall stand of green native grass compared to what native grass would normally look like in that area, and is it really an effective fire buffer? So there's debate about that, and if the fire's too close, it's just going to come through anyway. So yeah, it's a difficult. Bob, I don't know, maybe you can throw something in there as well.
Yeah, no, it's a common and great question.
No.
One of the key things is to use a lower growing a native grass, and actually even bluegrass, especially in the higher mountain areas. I see a lot of bluegrass that's kind of become naturalized. So bluegrass can be a pretty good native grass to have out there, but just don't irrigate and mow it the way you're not irrigating and mowing it like weekly mowing, and not irrigating it 2 or 3 times a week or whatever. But it's a lower growing grass. It's not going to be 2 or 3 feet tall and have a lot of fuel, biomass, that kind of thing. And there are other lower growing, the fine fescues are a lower growing grass that doesn't need a lot of water. So those are just some examples. And if you're in a more arid, a warmer season area, possibly down valley in Eagle County or something, you can use some of the warm season grasses even that are very low growing. So yeah, that it's a great question, because it's kind of the kind of classic situation. I mean, the nice thing is, if you still have your irrigation system out there, you can give it. It's good to have it be somewhat green and really just water it when you're in kind of more drought kind of conditions, which is kind of a little bit of a catch-22. Can't maybe water when we're in a tough drought situation, but having green grass is not going to burn near as much, or is like a dried out grass. So a little bit of watering, a little bit of irrigation. And I don't think typically, higher mountain Alpine like Summit County, in that, unless you're in some of the more arid parts, I mean, a lot of the areas really get a lot of moisture anyway. So, it's the other part of that we haven't really talked about, is there is some maintenance. So if it gets taller than a certain height, a foot or 2 feet, 3 feet, you definitely need to be cutting it back and cleaning up a lot of that, the dead grass, so that it's not fuel to burn. So, and I would definitely say too, from a fire standpoint, is probably when that grass kind of moves into the dormant season, September, October, it's a good time to cut that back to 4 to 6, maybe as high as a 12-inch height, so that you don't have that fuel there, and keep it kind of cleaned out, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that
came up a lot last year in Summit County. I'm glad you guys mentioned that, just because we did get a lot of precipitation last year in Summit County, and the sheriff's office was out there telling people, cut those grasses back because it's a fire hazard. So we have time probably for one more question, and this is this idea of aridification. So for those of you who have not heard this term, it's the idea that our environment overall, like Lisa mentioned, 20-year drought, the word drought itself implies end, right? But this idea of this long-term warming and drying has been referred to more as aridification, with the idea being that the air is very thirsty. So Cassie's question is that it takes water from the ground, right? Because the ground's super thirsty. And does this impact irrigation? So I think with that thirstier ground, Doug, I don't know if you have anything to say to that. I mean, would that simply just be, yes, aridification is going to require us, if we want to have these like bluegrass lawns, it's going to require us to irrigate more, which is obviously what we don't want to do. We don't want to irrigate more. We're trying to transition to those more resilient landscapes. Any thoughts on aridification?
It's weather. So we're warm and dry, and so that becomes an evapotranspiration value, and so we're losing water from the root zone due to that. So yeah, we're going to have to replace that water through irrigation. So it absolutely impacts it.
Great, thanks. And I think that's a really nice segue into our next part of the presentation, where we're talking about what what are those alternatives to turf? Also want to recognize we do have some more questions in the Q&A, so we're going to continue to get to those in the next Q&A session. Or if not, we'll just start rapidly typing answers so you guys can catch those answers. But with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bob.
Thanks, Rachel. Let's see. I was answering a question. Let's see. So yeah, I want to talk about low water mountain landscaping. So, which I'm assuming all or most of you are that are on are involved with that. So, and a good amount of this you're gonna already know. It's not all my, anyway, I don't have divine knowledge here or anything, or anything totally earth shattering, but some of this, hopefully a reminder, make you think differently or go like, I should start doing that and think more about that. Hopefully, if nothing else, that's what happens here. So kind of diving right into kind of the more landscape component, kind of 5 kind of key points here. But so first of all, just looking at more and more, just everything we do should be thinking about how is it, can we do something that's attractive, nice, that uses less water, and really also when you're designing things, looking at not using high water use plant material. So just just that drilling that thought into our heads and how we approach our landscapes, the new landscapes especially, but even the existing landscapes. Where are landscapes that, thirsty landscapes, where are landscapes that are high water use? And are they really helping, that beneficial to us, or at all necessary? Because a lot of times, like, it's you can have very attractive low water use plants, very attractive moderate water use plants. So that's where we want to kind of keep the thought kind of always going. How do we use less water with what we're doing out there and in landscaping? So, and it also, we didn't really talk about this, and it's not really in any of our slides, but sorry to digress a little bit. These are for you all that are contractors out there. This is opportunities, these irrigation efficiency repairs and upgrades, and the landscape changes and conversions are opportunities to, business opportunities. So really encourage you guys to, look at your clients' properties and say, we could probably reduce a lot of water and, be better, more drought prepared and things like that. So anyway, keep back to this. So first of all, we want to use, I kind of touched on it, native or hardy adapted low water use plants. So a lot of the native plants are great, and as much as you can use them, the local pollinators love that. But there are also some good hardy adapted low water use plants. And if we're strictly limiting to native plants, kind of, constricts the plant palette even more than I know it is already limited. So, there are some very good, non-native plants that are very hardy and useful, of course, to use. So again, low water use plants. And then avoid or limit high water use plants. And I said, except in wet areas, because I see that a lot, especially, in Summit County and similar areas where, a cool shady side of a hillside or a mountain, or even for that matter, a structure, a building, condominium, whatever, that it's kind of deep dark shade. And if you put a low water use native plant out there, it will, it won't be getting enough light. It will be too wet and it won't do well. So really, you can use higher water use plants, and if you're going to use them, put them in those areas. Make sure that they can tolerate some shade and cool wet, but use those plants, the higher water use plants in those areas is a perfect spot. Most, again, you all as designers know that, but kind of conversely, don't put those same plants on the bright sunny south side of a building where they're just getting baked, and you'll have to just pound them with water to keep them happy. So but that's right to the next point. Right plant, right place, a really common design concept, and probably everybody knows that, but just really got to, think about the water use requirements and what kind of plants, going to perform well in that location, but not just water use, how big it's going to be. Even things like, is it evergreen or deciduous? Deciduous is going to give you some summer shade, which is great. And evergreen is going to give you kind of the year-round greenery and shading in some cases, which may not be as desirable in the winter. So, you know, those kind of considerations, of course. So, and again, we're focused on design as far as it relates to water use here. So there's, you know, there's definitely other design concepts I know y'all are taking into account. So then kind of pushing on to using creative hardscapes, you know, and again, kind of the natural, you know, things that are already, you know, in the area, you know, that's kind of looks mountainy, looks right, kind of fits kind of what people are expecting to see when they come to the mountains or when they're living in the mountains. So, you know, but in bringing more of those, you know, and enhancing those for it, you know, making them look attractive. And the picture on our right is really good for a kind of example of this. It's a very casual landscape. We've got some mountain, you could probably call it large cobble in there as a border. It's, you know, it could be more formal for sure if you wanted it to be with, you know, more even cut stone and things like that. But, you know, and then you have the mulched areas, which the mulch will obviously hold moisture, which is beneficial, but also, you know, just gives you a rich, very nice, you know, look and woodsy look. So, and then the appropriate plants are in there. So that's a really good look there. But so yeah, use boulders, use logs, things like dry stream beds, or even artwork, you know, to kind of just bring some, you know, some pop and pizzazz to what you're doing. Kind of on that word, don't be too creative. I mean, you can be here, but I'd be really careful with water features. You know, they, you know, like waterfalls, streams, flowing streams. Those are just, when we get out to our sites and we're doing audits, people have just off the charts water use. And a lot of times it's like, it's not wrong, nothing not bad in their landscape. It's that their water feature is leaking and or losing water. So be really cautious about using those from a water use standpoint. You know, it's nice to hear the sound of water, but kind of have, you know, even self-contained smaller pieces to do that. If, you know, the more you can do that. So to avoid a lot of water waste and loss. So anyway, and then permeable pavers. So the water, you know, that falls can go down into the ground, irrigate, basically use that water instead of have it maybe even run off if you have like a hard surface, impermeable surface. And then mulched bed areas. Wood mulch is the first choice, but there's some really nice rock mulches, and doing a combination of the two is a great approach. So just low water and natural design elements, plants and the elements that are in the landscape. So next. All right, what about lawns? So I put in here, bring the mountains to the mountains. So my great thing is, you know, when people are visiting the mountains or in the mountains, it's like, you know, really people are in the mountains because they want to enjoy that environment and be in that environment, and not be like, you know, the city, you know, the suburbs, you know, urban kind of landscaping. It's like, you want it to be, you know, somewhat refined or nature tamed maybe a little bit, but not just, you know, really, you know, this perfect, you know, perfect lawns and all these other things. You want it to be mountainy. And again, the picture that's shown there is kind of gives you kind of a really great water efficient look. I mean, there's still color in there. And it's, you know, we've got our surfaces we just talked about that are let water drain in, and we've got boulders and, you know, all those things, trees, you got the seating areas, things, just all that is just, you know, great. So, but, you know, make the mountains look like the mountains instead of make the mountains look like the city, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, and then, you know, wherever possible, and especially in like, you know, side yards and areas where you don't need a lawn, don't have a lawn, and use things like native grasses and or just native, or even like we talked about a minute ago, bluegrasses, and find fescues and let them grow taller, you know, and maybe just use a string trimmer on them periodically to mow them down. And then once a year or so, you do a, you know, mow to really take them down, so they pop back nicely in the spring. So, so use less or limited or even no lawns. And again, they take a lot of maintenance. I mean, you have to be there every week. And if you miss a week, you're getting people are calling saying, hey, we got problems, or why aren't you mowing, or it looks bad or whatever. So there's an advantage there. It gives you a little more slack in your, the frequency of maintenance and the intensity of maintenance for sure. And then all the, a lot of weed control chemicals need to be going on lawns, as well as fertilization. And those, have some environmental impacts as well. So kind of scaling back on lawns. I'm not a complete no lawn guy, because I think there are places where lawns are really valuable and really bring you a look and a feel that is really, really great. But there's a lot of, well over half the lawns we have are not really that important. So on to the third point there is removing and changing out of non-essential existing lawn areas. So kind of touched on this in the Q&A a minute ago, but, looking at areas that it's not that important to have grass. So, and, the big term, and even the state legislature now is doing turf conversion, paying people to take out high water use areas, high water use lawn areas. And so, there's not enough funding there yet for that. So some people will get some of that, but I think it's going to be a super popular program. And so you're going to see a lot of people doing that. I think especially, down in, the Front Range areas where, the landscapes and the lawns use even more water because of, warmer, drier conditions. So, but yeah, let's kind of get rid of non-essential lawn areas. So I talked about this a minute ago. Stole my own thunder, but eliminate small areas of turf, narrow and hard to irrigate and maintain lawns. If you have an area of lawn that's smaller than 10 feet, maybe 8 feet's the number, but if it's anything less than 8 feet across, it's very hard to irrigate that efficiently. And it ends up being, again, more water going down the drain or across, even running off that landscape than is going into to keeping that turf looking good. And you also, a lot of times, because of those they can be hot, dry areas, compacted areas, and you end up, needing to put more water on them just to keep them looking good. So it's a bad mix. So, so the other thing which was kind of talked about here is we need to plan for and employ new and different maintenance practices. So like the landscaping on your right, it should use less maintenance input, but it's going to be definitely different maintenance input, obviously, as compared to having that all be, say, a lawn area instead. So, you all as owners, managers, or maintainers of those kinds of sites need to kind of like, okay, we got to do this differently, and have the equipment, have the tools, and just the plan to maintain those kind of areas differently than what's been done in the past. And really kind of we're really starting to phase from maybe a lot of mowing that we've done in the past, because there's been a lot of grass, to less mowing and more how do we make these beds look good, and how do we keep these in top shape. It's probably things like, even just if you want more of a manicured formal look, is just more kind of fine pruning and doing some more greater emphasis on bed weeding and things like that. So deadheading of some of the plant material, that kind of thing. So hopefully that was helpful. But yeah, just need to kind of tone it down, back off of the amount of and the reliance, and it's kind of the laziness really, and just kind of like, well, that's what we do. It's like the normal, same old. It's kind of the tradition almost of that's what we're what people think we're supposed to do, or that's what we do. We just roll out the sod and start watering it, and it's like that's old school. So anyway, next, take care of your soil. So really important if you want to have healthy, good plants, and whether even if it's grass, but especially trees, shrubs, perennials, all these things. And even native turf for that matter, native grasses, you need to have a quality soil. So a lot of the mountain sites, there's some great soils in the mountains, but there's a lot of really poor soils in the mountains, especially when you get down below the top, sometimes even a couple inches or 6 inches. All of a sudden it turns very minerally, very rocky, and plants aren't going to, it's a struggle for them to grow and do well in that. So a lot of times you need to import a good topsoil that has a good amount of organic matter in it, not an excessive amount of organic matter in it, but really looking at two things on an existing site. Kind of jump down to the bottom point really in this is, if you're having problems like the land, the plant material is not doing well, the turf is not doing well, it's like, do some soil tests of the area, and CSU has a great soil lab. There's other labs out there, but and they're pretty economical. Get some of your soils in and look at those things I list there. The pH, what's the pH of the soil? How much organic matter is in the soil? Do you have salts issues? That or other toxicities like high chlorides. And then also just look at your nutrient levels. Like if there's no nitrogen, chances are that plants are going to really struggle, and the soil test will tell you that. But so that would be on an existing site, but even on a new site, especially, like figure out what soils you're dealing with. Maybe it does have enough organic matter and you don't need to bring in a bunch of topsoil that has organic matter in, or add soil amendments to it. But you need to know, and that if you don't do those things, again, the plants are going to struggle. And it's really gets down to a lot of the organic matter gives, retains moisture, but also brings air into the soil. It makes a more looser, more less compacted soil. And then the microorganisms in the soil, really benefit by having a healthy, good soil, and that benefits the plant because the plant's, roots are in that environment. So my soil preparation, improves soil with organic soil amendments. It's kind of the unseen secret to healthy plants is, not skimping or cutting corners on that. It's another one where it's like, you don't see it. It's like, well, do we have to do that? Or nobody's going to know if we don't do that. And, today that's true. Tomorrow, it'll be very obvious that hadn't done a very good job of soil preparation. So the other piece that I see a lot on sites is you need to kind of do something about soil compaction, potentially deep tilling or ripping the soil with like kind of a claw or something to that effect, or a deep tiller. It's all about aeration is another term that would be in there, but really tight soils. Again, air and water pores, that's 50% of a typical or healthy soil volume are air and are occupied by air and water. The pore space is occupied by air and water. But when you get into compaction, those large and small pore spaces are gone. They're, it's just squeezed and squished. So that, and not having air and water in your soil, both are problematic. So when I see construction sites, especially, also just areas in high traffic or even, vehicle traffic or even maintenance traffic sometimes, those are areas that, especially if you're in the construction side of things, or a building's been built, get in there and loosen it up, and then get soil amendment in there, and ideally get a soil test and figure out what you're working with, and really get things healthy. The top, most of the plant roots are in the top 2 feet. And again, smaller plants, even, down to the top, 6 inches. So all you can do in that soil profile, that soil area, is going to help you in your plants growing well, having air and water to your plants' roots, and them thriving. So it's a big piece of the puzzle. So number 4, maybe. Lisa, number 4. There we go. Planting care and considerations, you all know already, but just the timing of your planting is really important, kind of to get the plants in the ground, the kind of the early part of the year, of the growing season. So, it means planning even now figuring out what you're going to do where and all the preparation, and then, hopefully being able to, when it comes time to, when the weather's nice enough and, your massive amount of snow this year has melted, then you're ready to come in pretty quickly behind and get the area ready for planting. But I would think usually mid to late May is kind of the front end of that, the beginning of good planting season, and then ideally by mid to late July things are in the ground so that they have a little time to kind of acclimate and get roots growing and taking up water, all that kind of thing, and before kind of that gets shut down by the end of the season. So you can obviously plant late, and sometimes you have to plant late. It's pretty more and more challenging to have that, the plants just really get in and thrive in that. So the more you can do your planting early in the year, that's going to help. Watering is really important and it's key. I say this a lot, but don't guess on the soil moisture in that, use a soil probe or a shovel, get your hands dirty, figure out, do I have a moderate amount of moisture in the soil for the trees and shrubs, perennials, or is it too wet or is it too dry? And just a visual look at the surface, it's not going to tell you. It'll look wet and it's dry. It'll look dry and it's wet, all that kind of thing. So, getting your watering right, adjusting your irrigation so you're not overwatering, and also just we kind of didn't touch on this too much, but if you're in a cool wet period and especially that happens in the mountains, shut off your irrigation. Don't forget to turn it back on, but it's a great way to save water. Just turn it off. And so something to think about. And same thing with plant establishment. Obviously seeded things, grass, if you're doing that, it needs kind of consistent moisture to get going and get kicking into gear. But after it's there, again, shut it off. Really would encourage you guys, especially with some of this, going to more of a native grass. You can save money on a project by having temporary irrigation. And that's this where you see irrigation sitting above the ground, pipes and all that. It doesn't look really good, but you only usually need it for about a year, and then or even 6 months just to get it going, and then you can pull all that, and a lot less expensive than putting all that into the ground and all that. So, and kind of heads you right on down the road to not having to irrigate those areas. But anyway, so and again, winter watering, and especially again where your locations in the mountains, they're not as important as it might be because you get a good amount of snowpack, but especially those hot, sunny, dry, and exposed locations, windy locations, they can use some water in the winter, especially new plants. Again, use your soil probe, see how wet or dry it is, and go, wow, these things are dried out. So, and then you can use anti-desiccant spray. You all know that on those new plantings, especially, but even on some of your evergreens there in the wind. And I've even seen some pretty interesting, burlap wrapped evergreen plant material, especially younger plant material, just to try to have it where it's not just getting blasted and dried out by the wind and the sun. So anyway, and so here's some Alpine and mountain plant resources I thought would be helpful. If you guys haven't been to Plant Talk, that's the website. It's like way more, there's more than you ever wanted to know there about everything landscape, tree, shrub, plant, turf. They've got one of their fact sheets is about trees and shrubs for mountain areas. That also is going to tell you that altitudes, a lot of those lists will tell you the altitudes that plant material is, hardy to, and or the planting zone, which is the third bullet down there. It talks about zone 3 is kind of the more of the alpine environment that most of y'all are in, unless you're down lower in some of the valley areas, especially like Eagle County and that. But yeah, Plant Talk's a great resource. You run into deer and rabbit issues, so that's kind of you got to sometimes blend these lists. What's drought tolerant that the deer and rabbits don't like to eat? So that's why you're professionals and get paid the big money to figure that out. So So another interesting site, and this is kind of on information on plants, but also nursery sources and planting in Colorado, is the plantsomethingco.org. The third reference there is just about, kind of plant zones, growing zones in Colorado, zone 3, the USDA, zone 3. There's a good list of perennials there. I don't know if y'all have been to the Betty Ford Alpine Gardens in Vail or the Botanic Gardens down in Denver. They have an alpine garden area, but those are really great places to kind of see these plants and, make a note of them, see where they're growing, how they're being maintained and cared for. Are they in a hot, dry location, a cool, wet location, a sort of in-between location, that kind of thing. But, and they have some, everybody needs a field trip, right? So anyway, that's hopefully helpful. I'd mentioned, right at the very top there, Colorado State University, you have your local county extension agents. Each county has they're kind of ag / horticulture landscape folks, and they've got, they're very helpful and have a lot of good information, good tools. So, calling them up and saying, do you have anything on this, or do you have any lists or anything you can help me with, or come, even if you're having a problem, they usually can come out and look at a problem you're having and help you hopefully solve it. But, again, all of this is like, look at things that don't need as much water, and kind of, be thinking, how do we, have a great looking landscape and environment, mountain kind of genre, and not use a lot of water. So anyway.
Great, thank you.
That.
So we threw a bunch of the links on the last slide into the chat, and then there's also a question in the Q&A about books and things where we threw some more links. So we can send out slides after as well. I do want to try to get through a couple questions, but thank you guys so much. That was so helpful. And I think the thing that really stuck out for me is mountains in the mountains, right? Because we heard at the beginning that customers who just want green grass and don't care what it costs, that's a barrier. So if that emotional appeal of you're coming to the mountains, you're in the mountains, have a mountain landscape does not work, that's when we need to be getting in touch with our elected officials. But more about that shortly. I do want to get to a couple questions. So water features. Excuse me. Water features aren't necessarily something that HC3 would get behind just because of that aridification piece, but knowing that there are going to be people who request that and that it is a demand, are there any best practices for designing water features to be more efficient?
I'll take a crack at that. You all too on the chat or that are out there, if you guys have your answers, that'd be great. Throw those up too. But you can design a water feature that is going to, is well built, well designed, well built, that is not going to, have a lot of water loss, but we just see them often, either they weren't designed well or they weren't built well, and there's a lot of water loss that gets lost. So trying to more, you can have a smaller feature, more contained feature. You still can get the acoustics of the water and the look of the water, and not have hopefully a lot of waste from the water. That's, also just since we're on that, the classic thing is you have a kind of a stream comes down and there's a pond, and then that recirculates and all that. And there a lot of times an autofill feature on those, and the autofill feature gets stuck open, and then it ends up flowing out of the, the lower end of it and just off to who knows where, but huge waster, and you don't really know about it till a water bill shows up. So, or you have as a stream beyond the stream or something. But anyway, so that's kind of something to watch out for. But I like the smaller features, and even like a, something that sits in the, in the corner of the patio, a self-contained kind of thing that, and maybe doesn't run all the time too. So, that you can really pay attention to and make sure you're almost, the more you can, it's sort of manually being monitored for the water levels and things like that, the more you'll have a better idea how much water is being used there. So
yeah, I was actually going to say you could add a flow sensor onto the fill pipe for that water feature and monitor it as well. But really, if there's a water feature, is just a water loss. Anytime that the water is exposed to the air, you're going to lose water through evaporation. It's the bottom line. So you can just kind of try to monitor and manage it the best you can.
Yeah, thanks. And I put this in the chat too, but managing your water use, or, being aware of your water use, is something that's come up a lot today. And I just want to point out that customers and HOAs can talk to their water provider to understand their water use. And many of those providers offer software, so they can just log in and see it, and they don't have to wait to get that water bill, because several water providers still bill quarterly here in Summit County. So contact your water provider. That's how you can understand water use. I'm going to have Lisa advance the slides just so we can wrap all this up. We're doing our best to answer any of the questions, remaining questions, just via typed messages, since we are running out of time. But to kind of think about all of this, I think there is a question in the Q&A about, what are people saying when we have a sudden increase in precipitation? Oh, we got so much snow, we got so much rain. Climate change is underway. It's not one thing that happens all at once. The climate is drying and warming regardless of what today's weather is like. And the quote that's really stuck out for me, and I can't take credit for it, was this idea that the future will look different than the past. And my addition to that is so must our landscapes. And I think Bob and Doug really did a great job of understanding, what does that look like? We're not saying get rid of all the grass. We're saying be responsible about it. And regarding, what's essential turf, I think the best definition I heard recently was, would you put your baby on it? So think about the median of the road, right? Would you put your baby on it? Probably not essential, right? If that grass outside the HOA never gets used, if that grass in this one small narrow spot of your yard doesn't work, just replace it, right? You have lots of options today. And I think as we think about all of this, right, because everybody on the call really is coming from different backgrounds, different roles and responsibilities, own your scope of influence. We all have one. Whether you're spending a couple extra minutes looking at head adjustment of sprinklers, of irrigation systems, whether you are designing something, whether you are advocating to an elected official, which we can all do and is a lot easier than you think. It's an email, guys. It's an email. So my task of you all today is to consider your scope of influence, own that scope of influence. And if you want to learn more about the things that we breezed through today, if we go to the next slide, there is an upcoming training that called Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper Certification. That's the QUEL course. It came up earlier today. That is April 26th through 28th. We're really just asking you to cover your food costs. It's like $50, 3-day certification. And then to participate in HC3's irrigation assessment program as a certified/preferred landscaper, we are asking that certified landscapers to participate in that program. So more information about all that stuff at highcountryconservation.org/water. And if we go to the last slide, I think we have all our contact information today. We might be like a minute over 11:30, guys. Understand if you got to drop off, but we'll leave that contact info, and then HC3's website QR code up there, just a hair longer, so you can log in. info@highcountryconservation.org if we didn't get to your question today. Always happy to answer questions. And again, thank you all so much for spending your morning with us and kicking off the season right. And I think with that, hope you guys have a great
Rachel,
day.
we do
Yes.
have a survey after.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. See, I knew I was going to forget something. This is important. Okay, Amazon gift card at stake. Lisa, do you want to share about the survey that they're going to be receiving today? Perhaps when they close their browser.
Yes, so when you close your browser, and it's going to be an email as well, we're just going to send out a survey just to gauge how you felt about this content, if it was applicable to what you do, and if there's anything that you'd like to see in the future. We'd love to get that information out there and help educate folks as much as we can. So please engage in the survey, and we're going to randomly choose someone that fills out the survey for a $25 gift card to Amazon. So yeah, please participate, and we'd love to hear your feedback.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. And for the folks we still have there hanging on the line with us, we did actually get a response regarding this water efficient water features. And we had someone from Series by Weston respond back to us. So I just popped that answer in the chat. So for the folks who were curious about those water efficient features, we did have someone on the line chime in with a few tips for you all. So we'll keep it live for another, okay, now we're like 3 minutes over. We'll keep it on the line so you guys can read that. But like Lisa said, answer those surveys. It really does help us improve these workshops and get you more relevant content so we can all be in this together and save more water. So with that,
I'll answer a couple of questions quick. Stuart, on
great.
your question on bluegrass to native, just overseed or plow up and reseed. I was going to answer it in the chat, but why not just reach out to us, or if anybody else has that same question. It depends is really what it is, the answer to that. You know, what your situation is and what kind of grass and things you're trying to do. But you don't necessarily have to remove the existing grass or tear it out to do the work. Makes it a lot easier to not. And then regarding quail, at this point, there's one being offered in Aspen, I think in the fall, late summer, and then they're down in Front Range, down in especially Castle Rock, South Metro Water Supply Authority. They are offering fairly frequent quail certification classes if you can get down there. So, but the one coming up at the end of April is conveniently located for you all. So hopefully you could make it to that.
Thank you. Yes. And if we posted actually the registration link up. So if you scan the QR code that's on your screen now, you will be able to get the link to that registration course. And in addition to the other ones Bob mentioned, I believe there's going to be another one in Summit County in the fall. So dates to be determined, typically October sometime. But for the folks looking to receive sort of those continuing education credits for this course, oh, we have someone already answering. I love this group. You guys are great. So for continuing education, so that could be reported just by logging into your quail profile. So hopefully by this time, I don't know, in a couple of months, many more of you will be certified. Anything else from the panelists before we shut her down and let folks get back to their day? Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time, guys. This was great. And check out that survey.
And email us with questions if you have any like pressing ones that came up and you like want to reach out.
Thanks, Lisa and Rachel, for High Country putting this out there. I think it's really good for folks to know about.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob and Doug. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.